Today we're going to show you how to change the idler pulley on your dryer, and it's a really easy job. All we're going to need is a 5/16 nut driver and a pair of snap ring pliers. Let me show you how we do it. Now before we begin this repair, since we will be working near some electrical circuits, we'll want to disconnect the power to the dryer. So simply pull the plug if it has a cord on it, and if it's a hardwired dryer, we'll need to locate the circuit breaker panel or the fuse panel and disconnect the power there. Now our next step will be to remove the front panel from the dryer. And on this model there are two 5/16 screws at the bottom of the front panel that secure it to the base. So we'll just remove those two screws. Now with the screws removed, we can tilt out on the bottom of that front panel and unhinge it from the top where it's held in place with two spring clips. And then pivot it enough sideways, we can access the wires to the door switch. We're simply going to remove those two wires. And there are two separate sized terminals, so they will be easy to reconnect them. And then we're going to set that front panel aside. Now next we're going to remove the front bulkhead assembly, and it's held in place with four 5/16 screws that secure it to the sides of the cabinet. And then we'll just lift up on that front bulkhead until we release the two tabs at the bottom, and then tilt out on the bottom and remove it from the dryer cabinet. Now next we'll want to remove the drum, and to make that a little easier, we will remove two screws that are in each front corner that secure the main top to the cabinet. Again, they are a 5/16 screw. Now with these screws removed for the top, that will allow us to gain a little extra room to pull that drum out. So we can just gently move it forward and lift it off the rear rollers, and then we can reach in and we find the belt around the idler pulley, release the tension on it and slide the belt off and unravel it from the motor pulley. And then we can pull that drum completely out. And we'll set that aside. We'll also remove the belt. And this will give us much easier access to replace the part. Now to do this repair, I find it easier if we actually remove the blower housing and motor from the dryer itself. This really held in place just with two 5/16 screws that secure the front of the blower housing to the base, and then there's a slotted tab at the back that will allow us to pull it completely out and remove it. We'll start by taking two wires off the thermostat on the cover of that housing. I suggest we just remove that vent from the back of the blower housing. Just twist that off. Remove the two 5/16 screws that secure it to the base. And then we're just going to lift up in the front of that housing and pull it forward. There's a tab on the bottom of that frame that will hook into the base frame of the dryer that secures the rear. So just wiggle it back and forth as you're pulling forward on it. And then we can pivot that right out. You can see that tab of the motor frame that hooks into a slot in the base frame. Now with the assembly out where we can work on it easier, we're next going to remove that snap ring on the end of the idler pulley shaft. So with our snap ring pliers, just insert them into the holes in that ring. And use just enough force to spread it large enough to pull it off of that shaft. Slide the little fiber washer off and remove the pulley itself. And then check the condition of that shaft. And if it shows any signs of wear, you'll need to replace it as well. And if it's not, just make sure it's clean and put a light bit of oil on that for lubrication. So then we're going to take the new pulley and slide that on that shaft, reinstall the fiber spacer washer, and then replace the snap ring. Make sure it turns freely. And now we're ready to reinstall that motor and blower assembly back into the dryer. Keeping in mind we're going to insert that tab on the motor base frame into the slotted opening on the base of the dryer. Make sure that's fully engaged in that tab. Line up the 2 screw holes on the front. Reinstall those 5/16 screws and tighten those securely. Next, we'll reinstall the wire harness to that thermostat. We'll reconnect the vent at the rear. And we're now ready to reinstall the drum in the front bulkhead. Now when reinstalling the belt on this dryer, I want to give you a good idea of how that is routed around the idler pulley and the motor shaft, because it's difficult to see from a wide angle with the drum in the place. So the belt is going to come down the right hand side of that drum. It's going to lay across the top of that idler pulley, and it's going to tuck down underneath. And then come over and go around the motor pulley. And when it's tightened, it will look like that. Now when reinstalling the drum, I suggest that you wrap the belt around it first, and then just take up the slack with your hand and hold it tight. And we're going to slide it up over top of the blower housing. And if need be, you can just lift that top just enough so that we can slide it in. And we're going to set the rear of that drum on top of the rear drum rollers. And then just let the belt hang loosely on the drum. And then we can reach in with one hand on the right hand side of that blower housing and our left hand in through the middle. And then we can pull that belt across the top of the idler pulley, down underneath the idler pulley. And then by just pushing on that pulley to take some of the tension of the spring, wrap it around the motor. And then while putting some pressure on that idler arm that is attached to a spring, just to release the tension some, we can wrap that belt around the motor pulley and back out under the bottom of the pulley off to the left and around the drum. Now I suggest that we turn that drum counterclockwise a couple of turns just to make sure that the belt lines itself up properly. So hold the drum up against the rear bulkhead, and you should notice the blower wheel turning at the same time. And we can now put the front bulkhead on. Now when reinstalling that front bulkhead, there's a couple things we want to make sure of, and that is the inlet to this chamber has to line up inside of that felt gasket. So make sure that that's flared out just enough. We'll tuck that down roughly into position. Rotate it around till it's square with the front. And then we need to catch the bottom of the drum with those glides so that they're supported properly. And hook those tabs in, one on either side. And that should line those screw holes up. Again, we're just going to turn that drum counterclockwise, make sure it's not binding. Reach around that felt, make sure we haven't collapsed that anywhere. And then we can reinstall the screws. And tighten those all securely. We can then replace the screws that secure the top to the cabinet. And again, we'll tighten those securely. And once we have both of those secure, we can now put the front panel on. Remember to reconnect the harness to the door switch. And make sure that those connections are secure. Then we'll rotate that front panel around, line it up, and make sure that the two spring clips at the top engage the lip at the front of the main top. And then install the two 5/16 screws that secure the front panel at the bottom. We're now ready to reconnect the power, and our repair is complete.